everyone, and welcome to The Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. If you don't believe in the paranormal, then the things you have to fear are likely minimal, right? I mean, we generally like to think that we're safe, that the locks on our doors serve their purpose, keeping evil out. It's comforting to believe that if we follow all the right steps, we can protect ourselves from potential harm. Well, it's been said that the greatest trick the devil pulled was convincing the world there was only one of him. I tend to agree with that statement. It's after reading stories like some of tonight's that I find myself wondering, when are we ever actually safe from the evils of the world? Maybe you'll agree after hearing them for yourself. So, let's get started, shall we? This story takes place when I was 14. It was late summer, and I was coming home from hanging out at the beach for my best friend Mia's birthday party. When I got off the subway at my stop, I looked at the bus arrival screen. The bus I would normally take home was arriving in an hour. Being a tired 14-year-old girl, I decided to take an alternate bus route home. This was a decision I would later regret. When I get off the bus at the stop, I have about a 10-minute walk to my building. My area at night is pretty quiet, not many cars on the streets. As I'm walking up the street, I hear the sound of an engine nearby. I look over my left shoulder, and I see a white panel van. I know, how typical. It's rolling up the street. I tried to think nothing of it, but when I turn onto my street, the van does too. Now I'm unsettled and start walking faster. This van is driving slowly and it never passes me. When I turn up the long driveway to my building, the van once again turns too. Now I'm scared. The driveway to my building has an ice rink on the side of it with bright lights. So I walk beside the rink under the bright lights. There are small townhouses on the other side of this driveway. The van catches up to me and stops. So I think maybe this person is lost and trying to ask for directions. I was trying to find some way to rationalize this. I stop. I stay about 4 feet from the van just in case. I look in the van window to see an older man starting to bald with black hair and a white t-shirt. I ask if they're lost. They don't respond. Instead, they try to get me into their van. I say no and start walking, but the van continues to drive slowly, following me. When a red car begins to drive down the driveway, the van drives all the way to the end of the driveway and waits for the red car to turn out before reversing to be beside me again. The man is still trying to get me into his van. I want to make a mad dash to my building, but I'm worried he'll see where I live, so I keep walking. When another car comes down the driveway, the van does what it did before. It drives to the end and waits for the car to leave. But this time, there's a cab dropping someone off at the townhouses. The cabbie is closing his trunk when he sees me. "Are you okay?" he asks. I tell him how the van has been following me, and every time a car comes, the van drives to the end and waits for it to leave before following me again. The cabbie tells me that he'll get in his car and drive to the end of the driveway and sit there for a bit, so I have enough time to run to my building. I tell him okay and thank you. The van is back in line with me again, so the cabbie gets in his cab and drives up the driveway. The van follows. I look and I see 2 vehicles sitting there. I run up the rest of the driveway into my building's lobby. My heart is racing. When I get to my apartment, I'm still freaked out. I go into my room and I call the cops. While I'm on the phone with the cops, I look out my bedroom window and I see the van. It's slowly driving around my building, looking for me. Now I'm fully panicking. The cops send officers to sweep the area, but they don't find him. 2 officers come to my apartment to get a statement from me. About a week after this happened, the officers come back to my apartment. They show me a photo of the man from the van that they were able to get from a security camera on the side of my building. I told them the man in the photo was the one that had followed me. They told me that they found him and that he was being put on a sex offenders list. So, to the man in the white panel van, let's not meet. This happened in 2016 when I was a 17-year-old first-year college student in film school. I lived alone in my first ever apartment. It was really small, but I was really proud of my independence. I never felt unsafe in this apartment for several reasons. There were multiple gates in the residence that needed to be opened through a code that only people who lived there knew. My door had 3 different locks, and it was right next to the university, so most people who lived in the neighborhood were college students. Nothing bad had ever happened in the neighborhood before. I've always been careful, very careful, with locking the door when I leave my home. I always check twice. I have slight OCD. So this one time, I leave to go to class and I lock my door, but for some reason, I couldn't get the key out of the lock. It was completely stuck. So I went to get the caretaker of the building to help me, but he wasn't there. I was getting late for class, so I went to class with the key still in the lock. I took off the keychain so that it wouldn't be as noticeable. When I got home, the caretaker was back, so he came to help me, and we couldn't get it out for 15 minutes, until somehow he did. He told me that the lock was damaged, and that I didn't necessarily need to change it if I only lock it once instead of twice. I said, okay, and that was the end of it. I really wasn't worried because of how safe I felt in this building. Flash forward to 2 months later. I was taking out the trash one night around 11 p.m. while on the phone with my sister. I remember telling her that I was taking out the trash and then I would take a shower afterwards before heading to a party. As I previously said, I always lock the door, even just to take out the trash. Because of my lock being damaged, I only locked it once. When I got back to my apartment, I found the door unlocked, which immediately alarmed me. So I went into the apartment and locked the door immediately, with 3 different types of locks. When you walk into my apartment, which is just 215 square feet, you have the main room in front of you and the bathroom door immediately to your left. I had left the bathroom door slightly open, enough so that I could see a man in my shower, turning his back to me. Naturally, when I saw this, I tried to open the door and leave as fast as possible, except my main lock was damaged from 2 months earlier, and I couldn't open it no matter how hard I tried. At this moment, all I could think of was the fact that I had to leave as fast as possible. I jumped out the window without really thinking. I figured it was the only solution, except I lived on the 2nd floor, so I completely smashed my ankles on the landing. I started running in whichever way that I could, and when I got a little bit further from the building, I looked back, and a man was there, at my window, watching me run away. I thought of 2 possible outcomes. Either the man was going to jump and chase me, except I wouldn't get very far with my twisted ankles, or he would get scared of heights and be locked in my apartment. Thankfully, he picked option number 2. I went to hide in a bush a little further, and I called the police, who arrived in just 10 minutes because I live close to the station. They pushed my door open, and the man was there just sitting on my couch, holding a kitchen knife, waiting for me to come back, like he didn't think I would call the police. They arrested the guy and later told me that he'd already been arrested for sexual assault, attempted kidnapping, and attempted murder. They also eventually told me how everything had happened. Like I said, it was a very friendly neighborhood with mostly college students. So he got inside the building by other people holding the door for him. He then heard me telling my sister that I was going to take a shower, which was why he was waiting in the bathroom for me. He crocheted my lock while I was taking out the trash. He had apparently noticed me on school campus and followed me to my home several times before succeeding to actually get in. He stayed inside waiting for me because I had recently changed my phone. The previous one was still on the table, so he thought I didn't have a phone to call the police. I don't live there anymore, but after that, to get into the building, we all needed identification proving we lived there. Building IDs were created. We had to scan them every time, and it was the only way to go inside the building. Nothing bad happened in the neighborhood after that. It's back to being very peaceful and friendly. This happened many years ago. To preface, I don't believe in the paranormal, but to me it's really fun to think about. And this experience I had definitely has the paranormal vibes that some stories do. So I decided I'd post it. I was in high school in Northern California, and my closest friend was having a family reunion I was invited to. Around 9 p.m., the last family had arrived, and for some reason they didn't have their daughter with them. I don't know why they left her, so they asked us to go get her. Now, Tizian just got his first car, and when you finally have that freedom, anything is a good excuse for a road trip. And they live 2.5 hours away, but they gave us money for gas. So we pile in the car, and we're on our way without a second thought. We've got music going, snacks, all around just enjoying a good time. Finally, we get off the highway and find ourselves in a secluded, forested town. No big deal. We find the last turn and are going down a tiny dirt road with thick forests on both sides. Eventually, the radio starts to cut away a little bit, and I turn it down so we're not listening to static. But this little dirt road just goes on and on and on, to the point of absurdity. So me and Tizian start joking about who in the world would come out this far to build a house. Then, and this is what will stick with me for the rest of my life, this overpowering smell comes into the car. Copper. So thick it's almost suffocating. We both retch, and it made my stomach turn. It was so heavy in the air, I felt like it could be cut with a knife. We kept going, though, and eventually we made it to a wooden bridge about 20 feet long. As we kept on going, the smell dissipated, and the radio came back in. We eventually made it to a clearing with about 5 houses, which we immediately started laughing about. Not only did they come all the way out here to build one house, but they built 5 in the middle of the woods. Why? So we pick up his cousin, Shy, that's her name, and I immediately ask her about the smell coming in, and she has no clue what I'm talking about. There's never been a smell before. She gets in the car and is about our age and has the same taste in music. The song comes on that she likes and she wants us to turn it up, so we do. And now it's almost midnight, and we're blasting music back down this absurdly long road, back the way we came. As expected, the radio starts to cut out little by little, and then the smell hits us again. Not gradually, though. More like smacking into a wall of pennies. I immediately turn to Shy and ask again, and she's absolutely disgusted and assures us that this is not normal. But as she's saying that, we come back onto the bridge, and as we're making it over, suddenly the car stops. I turn to Tizian and ask what he's doing. It's not me, and he lifts his knee higher to show me that he's stepping on the gas. And that's when I hear the terrible sound of tires not making connection with the ground. And the car starts ever so slightly, lifting from the back. We all immediately look out the back window and are met with nothing but darkness. The angle that we're at isn't anything extreme, just enough to feel your weight shift. But whatever it is, it's lifting a Chevy Tahoe. Shy immediately starts screaming, and admittedly, I'm freaking out a little bit too. And the sounds of static, a girl screaming, and the engine and the tires spinning freely, they're getting to me. I'm frantically looking out of every window trying to assess the situation, but I just don't see anything. Then, Tizian yells out in panic, and just then, suddenly the back end drops. The car lurches forward, and we very nearly almost run into a tree. But thankfully, Tizian regains control. We sped out of there as fast as we could, and very quickly, the smell clears, and we find ourselves out of the forest and back on a paved road. When the radio came back, the mood was entirely too wrong, so I just turned it off as we drove down the lonely highway in silence. When we made it to the gas station, we immediately went to the back of the Tahoe to see a giant dent covering most of the center. And then Tizian finally broke the silence. I think I saw it. Shy then replied, I did too. I didn't see anything at all, but when I pressed for information, it was clear they didn't want to talk about it. Years later, when I brought it up one day, Tizian swears he saw what looked like hooves very briefly in the side view mirror. Being a skeptic, I'm not sure if I really trust him, but I also have absolutely zero clue as to what could have lifted the back of a Tahoe. Honestly, I've told this story to many of my friends, and never once have I, or anyone else, thought of something logical that makes sense. Why would a paranormal being capable of lifting a Tahoe let us go? Really wish I just got out of the car and checked out what happened. It's a question that stuck with me my whole life. Four years ago, after just getting my degree, I decided it was time to leave my hometown and pursue my career. So I moved to a big city that was about 9 hours away from my parents and most of my family. I had no friends there for months, and my starting salary was low because I came into the company as a trainee. I was very demotivated, and I missed my family a lot. At some point, I decided to go to visit some relatives who lived by the coast, which was 4 or 5 hours away by car. I didn't have a car, and the buses were expensive. But my cousin told me about this Facebook group for rides between my city and another city that was close to their town. I went there and I found myself a ride with some university students who were just a few years younger than me. The day for the trip came. I met them, and in total there was about 5 of us in a wide sedan. A lady who was studying medicine, owner of the car, her boyfriend, the driver, a sophomore girl who was friends with them, and a random young guy who found their ad on Facebook. Let's call him Mark. It was a Friday, and people from this whole region were infamous for drinking extremely often. So, inspired by the warning my cousin gave me, I awkwardly asked them, Sorry to ask, but none of you have drank recently or planned to do it on our trip, right? The driver assured me that he was fully sober and that he wouldn't have any even if the passengers did. After hearing that, his girlfriend and the other girl assured that they wouldn't drink because their parents were very strict and they wouldn't want them to misbehave. Mark giggled when he heard that and whispered to me, women in their town are famous for drinking a lot and denying it. The trip went on and we went around dozens of mountains. We had a few conversations about university and work, and most of the trip was us listening to popular singers from the 90s. After around 2.5 hours, the driver stopped the car at a gas station. Mark decided to go in with him, as he wanted to get something from the store. A few minutes later, I see Mark and our driver come back to the car, each holding a 6-pack of cerveza. Well, actually, the driver was carrying 2 of those. I almost freaked out, but I kept my composure, and I asked them if they were going to drink now. The driver said, "I won't until I'm done driving, but let the others and yourself take 1 or 2 if you want." Almost 2 hours later, we'd left the mountains and arrived to a flatland. The sign said that we were just a kilometer away from the city. Suddenly, the car took a right turn, leaving the main road and heading toward the suburbs. The place looked desolate, and most of the houses seemed empty. I thought it was a bit weird, but I didn't ask anything because I assumed that maybe we were dropping off the other girl and that they probably knew where she lived. The dude then just parked the car on the yard of the abandoned house and said, "We're basically home. Are you guys down for some drinks?" Mark was totally down for it. But the girls kept saying stuff like, "I'm not sure, I don't usually drink. Okay, I'll make an exception. Only because we had tough midterms." I refused and said, "But how are we going to get to the city? You guys agreed to take me to the bus station." They said that it was already very close and that in worst case, I could just walk there. I was more worried because I planned to take the local bus at a certain hour to then get to my cousin's town, which was still an hour away from there. They started drinking really fast, and the girls got to the point where they were trying to pee doing a handstand against the wall. I was desperate to leave, but I didn't feel safe walking to the city because it was really dark out there, and this region had a bad reputation for crime. Outsiders were specifically more at risk. There was no phone signal there, so I had to wait for these guys and see what they could offer me. They finally decided it was time to go home. I said it wasn't okay for them to drive anymore because they were all drunk, and I offered to drive. However, the driver said, "It's not up to me. The car belongs to my girlfriend." However, his girlfriend refused, saying that she didn't even know me and that her dad wouldn't be okay with a stranger driving her car. I said I understood that, but that we had to sort this out somehow. After a bit, the driver finally got out of the driver's seat. I assumed they would let me drive. I was sitting in the middle of the back seat, so I asked the guys next to me to let me get out of the car. The sophomore girl, who was to my left, did, but before I could stop her, she climbed into the driver's seat. This girl started saying,
"Friend, please let me drive. It's close and there's no one outside anymore."
The other girl said,
"Okay, sure, but go slow, okay?"
The previous driver got into the back seats with me and confined me back to the middle seat. I was getting upset. I wanted to stop her, but I didn't know how because everyone seemed okay with the idea. My panic got even worse when this sophomore girl started asking them how to turn on the car and how to operate it. "You don't know how to drive a car?" I asked in despair.
"No, I don't. It's my first time trying. My parents haven't let me learn."
Get down then, please. I have a driver's license. I can get you home safely." Then the owner of the car told me that I couldn't decide over her car and said that it would be okay, that there was almost nobody out driving at this hour, and that they would help her friend learn how to drive. I asked them to just let me get out of the car, but they wouldn't let me. They swore it was a very short drive and that we would go slowly and that it would be okay. The girl really had no idea about how to drive. Unfortunately, this was an automatic transmission car. Had it been a manual one, she probably wouldn't have even been able to move it. And the car moved, but in the ways you would expect for it to move, with a driver who had never stepped on the pedals of a car before. She would hit the brakes and steer the wheels so hard. She drove on the middle of the road and kept freaking out while others yelled at her about what to do. I was begging them to let me get out of the car, but they wouldn't listen to me. Fortunately, the streets were empty, but I couldn't help but fear that if any car came, we would for sure crash against it. Eventually, we made it to the street where the bus station was. As soon as they pointed that out, I asked them to just stop the car already and let me walk from there, but they did not. They forced me to be dropped in front of the station. I don't even know how I could get out of this sort of situation if I was in it again. All right, I'm going to explain why I believe there's a presence in my family's home. But first, some context. There are 2 houses on our property, a large one that we rent and a small one that we stay in. When we aren't renting it, we enjoy living in the big house and we stay in the guest bedrooms. I'm currently staying in a room on the first floor. There's 2 floors. And my parents usually stay in the master bedroom upstairs. Occasionally, they'll go back to the small house to stay in their designated room out there. But since I like the large house so much, I usually stay in it anyways, alone. I'm not incredibly terrified of anything happening when I'm alone, on the first floor or in the house, as we're in a pretty good town. I do, however, spend my leisurely time enjoying Reddit stories about the paranormal and let's not meet. That being said, I always have scenarios and a plan in my head. I'm very much a night person, and before I got a puppy a few weeks ago, my sleep schedule was even worse than it is now. Now, on to the story. Over the last few months, I've been noticing very small things around the house, at very late hours. The most common is a door opening or closing slightly, and causing the hinges to make a deep groaning sound. I usually don't see the doors move, but I always hear the familiar noise that it would make if I were to move it. Each time I feel the air for wind or airflow, and each time there's none. Keep in mind, these are super heavy, solid wooden doors, and they've got no reason to be swinging around at night. I've only noticed this occurring with the closet door in our hallway, which is built under the stairs, and the guest bedroom door to the one that I'm staying in. Usually my response to the closet door opening and closing is to look behind my shoulder when I hear the hinges groan, say loudly, "Do you mind?" and then I return to what I'm doing. One of the most recent and scariest encounters I've experienced involved my new dog. I keep her with me at night, and she always chills on the bed with me. She's a mini schnauzer, so she's always incredibly alert. She's pretty bonded to me, so she will occasionally bark at my parents if they sneak up on her. I was on the computer doing schoolwork, and my parents had gone to bed hours ago. All of a sudden, she started to bark exactly as she would at a person, perched at the end of the bed, facing the closet and the bedroom door. I was immediately freaked out, but I assumed that it was my mother, who was a light sleeper. coming to check on me. That was until I noticed the door, which was open about 7 inches, gracefully close by itself. I thought that I must have missed her hand on the door or something, but the hallway was lit very well at the time, and before it had closed, I looked through it and clearly seen absolutely nothing and no one. Paranoid now, I yelled, "Mom?" a few times, to no avail. I then, very cautiously, grabbed the nearest sharpened pencil from my homework setup and slowly opened the door. The hallway was empty. No one was awake. I'm convinced that my dog either saw something or sensed something that night, and for whatever reason, felt the need to alarm me. Now, the bedroom door has moved before, but never that far. Usually I hear the latch squeak when it moves, which has grown completely normal for me, but not like this. This was too freaky. I used to have horrible nightmares, and this ties into my theory that this presence can only tread in a certain path, as some of the events have occurred in a clear line across the property. I had a dream, night terror maybe, that I was laying in my bed, waiting to fall asleep, and all of a sudden a voice passed through my head whispering. I can only explain this as how you hear a ghost. I felt this sudden sense of foggy blackness in my head, and it felt like someone was choking me. I woke up, gasping for air. It seemed too real. I had another dream where I was in my bedroom, in the small house, while we had renters, I assume. This bedroom is also within the line of paranormal theory. I was in my bed, but I couldn't move. My room seemed to loom over me, and there was dim lighting. All of a sudden, this fuzzy, glowing figure started to emerge from below my bed. He was tall, but he had no defined edges to his figure because they were constantly moving. The best way I can describe it is that he was made of electricity, because he made very electric noises. He crackled and buzzed, and my terror grew as his featureless face and body seemed to reach out to me. All of a sudden, I was shaking uncontrollably in panic, fear, and the same electricity he seemed to give off. Around that time, I woke up. I believe these to be unrelated, but I'm unsure. Within the same line of my theory, I experienced the most chilling thing of all. I believe everything that night was real. I live in a place where the indigenous people were pushed out like so many others, and our property is actually built over what we assume to be an ancient fishing camp, as we found lures, old stone carved bowls, and fish hooks. It was about 11:35 p.m., and it had just rained. I was in the small house's bathroom, and I leaned my head out the window to smell the wonderful earthy scent. As I did so, I heard chanting in the native language to this place. I know this because in school we were taught parts of the native language. I got chicken skin. The chanting used words that I couldn't understand, but were definitely in the native tongue. What was even more chilling was that it sounded as if it were inside my head, but not in the way that you would imagine it or narrated in the voice inside your head. I couldn't hear my voice. I was hearing an elderly voice, chanting foreign words. It was as though it was all around my head for about 5 to 10 seconds. I was frozen there, listening. There are no words to describe it, honestly, and there's nothing like it. It's one of those things you just have to experience yourself. Make of all this what you will. During the summer, before I got my puppy, I would stay up until about 4 or 5 a.m., finishing schoolwork for a math program I'd signed up for. I was staying in the back bedroom on the first floor, and I decided I wanted a 3 a.m. snack. I walked down the hallway and stopped when I heard the oven beeping. The time read exactly 3:01. The oven makes a beeping noise when you push the buttons. So I was confused, and then gradually more terrified as I heard the beeping continue. I watched as the oven screen was filled with flashing orange placeholders, which I had never seen before, each one beeping as it was entered. And then a bunch of ones and zeros, which were entered much quicker. There was no one there, and I had never seen the oven do this before. It was as if someone was typing in the numbers. I was freaking out now, but as I moved into full view of the kitchen, toward the stairs to go wake up my parents, it stopped. I froze on the stairs and waited. The oven screen made 1 or 2 more beeping sounds, and then returned to its usual green digital clock. I was horrified. By this time I realized that it would be useless to wake up my parents, as there was no evidence of this happening. There was no immediate danger, and they probably wouldn't believe me anyways. I went straight to bed after that, believing I had seen something I wasn't supposed to. Back in summer of 2020, I was 14. I would spend a lot of time with my cousin, and we both loved going on walks and would always walk the neighborhood near her house. One night I was spending the night over, and we decided to go on a walk. It was around 10 p.m. I'd like to preface this by saying that the roads weren't well lit, so it was very dark. We were used to that, so we weren't scared at all. While we were walking, a white Jeep started driving very close to us. The guy who was driving lowered his window, and there was another guy with him. They both seemed to be about 25 years old. The guys were just weirdly staring at us for like 2 minutes. Then the guy in the driver's seat started asking weird questions like, "Are you girls not scared of the dark?" And after asking this, he drove away. Me and my cousin were relieved, thinking that it was just a joke. But unfortunately, we noticed the Jeep's lights on the road, and it seemed like they were going back and forth before coming to our level again. And this time, it was the guy in the passenger seat who talked. He asked if we wanted a ride home, and then he said, "We will take care of you," while smiling. And at that moment, my cousin's eyes opened wide. After that, they drove away again. My cousin and I were petrified. We couldn't even speak. We were still hearing the Jeep, so we didn't want to run home. We were scared they would follow us home. We didn't have our phones because we usually don't take them on our walks. So we hid inside a garden behind some trees for 10 minutes. The Jeep came back, but fortunately, they didn't see us. When the lights disappeared, we sprinted home. We got there and cried a lot. She told me that she got so scared because she noticed that there was a knife and some sort of pills in the back seat. Don't walk in small neighborhoods at night, and never just blindly trust a place. This happened when I was in my 30s. First, a little background. I had an Aunt Mary who moved in with my parents, my brother, and older sister when I was born to help my mom out with us. She was extremely close to me, so she always called me her girl. It made me feel special. Okay, on with the story. So I was dating this guy, and we got into an argument right before I left to go to work. I worked nights as security, I had a 2-story apartment with 2 cats. So, like I said, we got into it before I left for work, and I knew he was scared of dead people, ghosts. At this time, my Aunt Mary had passed, and I kept her obituary downstairs on my bar. I knew this creeped him out. As I was walking down the stairs, I shouted, "I hope my Aunt Mary comes and bothers you tonight." I thought nothing of it. I just wanted to screw with him since he pissed me off. So the next morning when I got home, he was awake and looking crazy. I asked him why he was up and what was wrong with him. He said he kept hearing noises downstairs all night, and the cats kept going to the top of the stairs, looking down and hissing. I remembered what I said before I left for work, and I just smiled and said, I guess she came to mess with you since you pissed me off. Sweet revenge. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. But remember to join me every Friday night for a brand new one. If you haven't already, please do me the biggest favor ever and like this video, subscribe, and tap the notification bell for future videos. Thank you everyone who shared their stories with me, and thank you to everyone for listening. You can follow me on Instagram and check out the subreddit at thedarkesthouryt. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com. Stay spooky.